order. Let's see here. We have a couple of items on our agenda that have been continued or a request to continue by the applicant. One at 346, 348 Main Street, and the other at 0 Harold Ave.
I'll move that we continue the 346, 348 Main Street to February 10, 2025.
Second.
I watched the video, well, I'll second
okay.
it, but I watched the video today and I thought the board did a great job kind of burrowing into many of the issues, but I did have a couple of questions. I don't know if now is the right time. We won't debate it, of course. I'm just curious if you could fill in some of my understanding. If you prefer, we can wait.
I think it's more appropriate to wait, or we can have a individual conversation without
That's fine.
the whole,
None of it involves
without
the
the whole
permit
board, right?
proper.
I mean, if we're continuing it, we probably shouldn't discuss it.
Okay.
Is my thought.
Second it.
Oh,
I'll second
you
it.
second? All right.
I'm still getting up to speed.
All right.
Carry on, I'll be there in a minute.
So we will, right, guys on,
It's on Zoom.
all right.
So you
And I'm
probably-
sorry, I just delved in
No,
without
that's
the
fine.
whole
It's a light one.
spiel.
Yeah.
And so we'll have a roll call vote, starting with Guy, actually. See,
Yes.
all right, Hillary,
Yes.
John, yes, Heather,
Yes.
and John.
Yes.
Do we need to do the spiel now?
There's no one in the audience, so. And then, I'm sorry, I just got lost.
Second application.
Second,
Then there was a
yeah.
second continuance.
For 0 Harold Ave.
I'll make a motion, back up here, to continue the public hearing for the definitive subdivision application at 0 Harold Ave, aka 0 Van Norden, 0 Harold Avenue, to March 4th, 2025. I'll second it.
All right, roll call vote. We'll start with Guy.
Yes.
Hillary,
Yes.
John, yes. Heather,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
so that ends the scheduled part of our agenda. Is there, right, we have a number of items, planning updates and other topics. Is there anything particular that you think that we should take first and address first?
I can quickly do Grandview because there's not actually a need there. And then I was thinking maybe reorg at the end of the night, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so other than that, we can maybe take them down the list from there.
Okay.
So the Grandview Road subdivision bond and covenant endorsement is not going to be a topic of discussion tonight. We had finalized with engineering, so backing up when this was last on the agenda, at the applicant's request, when we had done the site inspection, we found a series of needs that they needed to do prior to us being able to recommend a bond. They since completed those needs. We were able to conduct our site inspection with the engineering division, document all the needs that we found, and we're able to finalize the bond amount that we were requesting. We did that early in the week, got that to them. They had asked to be placed on the agenda in the light that they could get the bank authorization before the meeting. That did not happen. So no need tonight to discuss on that, but at least that knowing that that bond amount and request is in, And so long as they can get us the bank agreement and form necessary forms, in all likelihood at the next meeting, that will be a topic of discussion to come. And to remind all, that's a need prior for them to get a building permit on any lots and any other further conditions in the 3 series of decisions for this project will be sure to be met prior to building permit. And this is just a piece of that. So that is underway. If there are any questions.
I think there's a question from the public.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tony DeRezzo, 130 John Street. Does the bond numbers also include restoration of town property for grading?
I do not believe so, but those easements that are in mind and are still being worked through, I think we had conditioned them prior to occupancy, if I remember correctly, not building permitting. So, but I'll tally a note to, in terms of restoration, in what regards of the town property.
My understanding is the applicant graded town property so that they could build their subdivision road.
Right.
So it should have to be restored to the state it was before the applicant began building. And I would say that that should be included minimally in the bond to be returned if it doesn't happen. And I would also highly suggest that there be a plan in place for it to be done before any building permits are allowed. He should have had that easement well before he did any work. Going after the fact for an easement seems counterproductive and counterintuitive to the way anything should be done.
Understood. We'll look in terms of restoration, what needs are. Let's see if we can include that. Generally, the bond is for the right-of-way itself, but understanding that this was imperative to the right-of-way establishment, I'll look if that can be included and what needs there may be on that town land.
Thank you. And do we know who and how these easements are being requested?
Through the planning and engineering office to bring to, I believe, then the select board, and if not town meeting, following the fact.
So we could potentially see a warrant on the article at town meeting for these easements.
Right. You could potentially. Huh?
And if they're not granted, what happens then? Because
Yes,
he's already
that's-
built
right,
it,
That's the
so,
question we've been battling back and forth in planning and engineering of what if that easement isn't granted.
all right, just so it's on everybody's radar.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
I did have one question, and that is, on the unit prices that are listed here, were they derived contemporaneous? Or were they derived originally when it was constructed for the bond?
Sorry.
When, under the unit prices that are listed, were they derived, when were they derived? When did they come in?
Recently as last week or two.
Okay, that's
Yep.
fine. I just want to make sure if there's any inflation that would
No,
cover
those
the
capture
inflation.
the
Okay,
Recent costs affected.
that's fine.
Did you mean when were the unit costs or when were
Yeah.
the amounts determined?
Well, when are the unit costs? The amounts, I assume,
Derived from that.
are some are pretty static.
Does the body vote on that from time to time to see that they keep up with?
On unit costs?
Is it
No, we don't.
somebody-
Right, this is, right, engineering works out their costs, their estimated costs of the town,
Got it.
like, what it would cost the town to take that over, or
who's
someone else to take
administrated
that
all
over.
that, all the
I think-
the scope.
I think they're probably in a better place to understand those costs than we are.
Noted.
Though there are some costs in here that are categorized as slope easement.
Yep.
That are under the category of
Right,
slope
I don't know
easement
if
for,
that's necessary.
yeah, I don't know if that's the same,
Restoration,
yeah.
the same,
Yeah,
so that's what
yes,
I have to
yeah.
double check.
Actually, I have a follow-up question to Mr. DeRezzo's observations. These aren't funds in escrow at the bank. I assume they buy a bond of some sort and pay interest on the bond. But in the event of default, How does the town get made whole?
Right, this is, it ends up being a three-party agreement, right? So,
But who pays the town in the event the scope of work is not completed and we call the bond or it has to be paid for the,
Bank will hold the funds.
right, but in the event, the extreme event that the developer says no, the slope is unresolved,
Mhm.
the monies are held by the bank in the form of a bond, I assume.
Mhm.
I don't know. How would you actually effectuate the transfer of those monies to the town to do the work?
It is quite a process, is my understanding. I don't know the finer
I didn't mean to
mechanics
ask it
of
about,
that.
I just
Yeah.
was curious.
Yeah.
and, yeah. Right, so you can call the bond, right? There's some legal,
Due diligence.
yeah. And then, it's actually, right, because it happens all the time in construction.
In bigger projects.
Yeah, bigger projects. So I think the problem on something like this is the legal end of getting to the amount is probably
Significant.
significant chunk.
And the amounts that we cite are not meant to be anything but replacement costs. It's not meant to be a disincentive in its own right. It's purely just the cost of replacing that labor.
Right, it's not like punitive.
But it is
Yeah.
the cost that the town would expect to pay with prevailing wage, so in the developer sense, like, it's generally higher than they might estimate,
I
but
see.
that's
It's still
because of-
onerous in their eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Andrew, one thing to consider on that is typically in a surety bond or like performance bond, if defaulted, the surety holder, in this case being the bank, pays. Sometimes they also reserve the right to place the contractor, so there should be a vehicle in there that makes sure that they're doing so at what the town's cost would be, because it would be different if you're overseeing it, having to hire prevailing wage versus them sourcing it.
Right, agreed, yep, and that's originally why we provide the estimate rather than using the developer's number. But heard your note, Guy, and I'll double check any language when they forward that over.
And I think, right, maybe not on this one, but in other ones where we've had the discussion about, making sure that the amount doesn't get so low that it's easier to walk away
Yeah,
than to
the
do the
walk away
work.
price, it's just a nuisance at that point.
Well noted.
All right.
Alright. In terms of the Eastern Gateway updates, we really just wanted to provide the summary memo from the initial open house in mid-December that happened to be on the night of probably the largest rainstorm of the year at the end of the calendar year.
There are lots of people there. Look at the photos.
There were lots of people there, especially for the night. So it was about 20 to 25 residents. So it was a small group discussion, but I think with a lot of different opinions and thoughts, which led to a thorough discussion in terms of potential here. I think we want to use that and recognize that there are a lot of different opinions, but that just that night alone isn't enough to set some priorities and how we engage from here on out, whether that's surveys or other open houses or et cetera, to be able to gather more input before we start putting any type of conceptual plans out there in terms of layouts and uses of that nature. So we'll be working through that process both with the steering committee. We're set to meet next week. I think it will end up on Tuesday night. We'll try to meet, but there's obviously a select board meeting, so we're just trying to find the right date for that to get all the 8 members in a room. Review some needs, questions that need to be answered throughout the process and how we're going to go about answering those and finding the answers to them. And ultimately how the engagement is structured both townwide and with some focus groups. So we'll continue on that effort. We just wanted to get you the summary memo just again, keeping you up to speed on where things are at with that. So, as an update,
When are they looking for our comment?
I think we'll be looking for your comment as uses become more substantially identified, and then how those translate to zoning language and policy in and of itself. And so that could be in the middle to late of the process. Guys on the steering committee as well as liaison, so that will help us inform, and we'll be providing these periodic updates, if not every month, at minimum every quarter. So throughout, obviously we encourage engagement when we host events or have a survey and things that you are able to contribute to those types of tools, but until there's actually some thought towards how these evolve to zoning and layouts and site lookout, there's not much that I don't think we need to do in the short term.
My one comment I've got a lot of comments, but my one comment is they need to outline the area that is in question that they're looking at so that we geographically know where it is, and need to understand who all the owners are and what property is constructed already and to be constructed.
Yeah, we have that. We can share it.
Okay, but that, I thought they would have at least had that on their document.
Yeah, I mean, this open house was more just to start framing up the discussion, right, where it is, and generally what are some high-level needs there, which like open space, massing type things that might be appropriate, but there's a lot more thought that needs to be put into those type of things before really getting into the finer details of them. But yeah, we have like the site geography and who owns them, and we're running the numbers of how much commercial square footage is there now and how can that translate that to make sure we don't lose commercial square footage and opportunity in the district and so on. So we're running those type of analysis.
Okay.
Is there a place on your website
There
where you
is
have
a-
this or are going to have information?
There is a web page. I'll double check. I don't know that the memo made it up there yet, admittedly. So we'll place that in a better outline of the geography and make sure all those tools are there.
Yeah, and I assume individually we can communicate with Guy.
Sure.
Yep.
Just thinking about socializing this with the public, this is one of those topics that probably would get more interest as it got closer.
Mm-hmm.
I see from the notes, it looks like there were 18 or 19 attendees at this event, which is, I suppose, given it terrible weather, is not to be unexpected. Have we ever thought about doing, videotaping events like that is hard because of the acoustics and
Mm-hmm.
the speakers are far away from the camera, et cetera. Have we ever thought about trying to build a video series that we could videotape and put on RCT that attempts to project some of the major elements, not every nit and detail, but some of the overarching elements, just to try to get awareness and
Yeah, I like
share.
that thought. And towards the tail end of MBTA communities, we did some videos like that, just a high level. Here's what it is. So I can reach out to see if that's something we can program into this effort, because they were useful and they are digestible, I think, for a lot of people.
If you break them up into pieces, people have limited attention span, but say it's a 15-minute piece and you have 5 of those to explain different facets of the problem. You get a bit more mind share. People have a chance to listen, or you can refer to it in a written article.
I agree. Let me see maybe what we can come up with for a scope and some
There's a
topics.
marketing aspect to this above and beyond the design and technical aspects. It's just, and it's not pitching it, it's just, this is what we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the thought, and let me see how we can evolve that.
Yeah, in videos, right, YouTube can reach a lot
Mhm.
more diverse
Yeah.
folks, right? People that watch TV and people that don't watch TV or RCTV, and
Yeah, and you can
Yeah.
use those links
Yeah.
over and over and
Yeah.
over
Right.
again.
RCT, if you could help us with pre and post production.
Yeah, I've always been curious how we can partner.
I mean, they have their own programmatics,
Mm-hmm.
but this might be something where we ask their help with setting up how do you do this in a way that's entertaining and useful and make it look like it's professional and not two guys on an iPhone.
I don't disagree. Let me explore some options there and what we can come up with.
I'm going through the memo again here. It's really, I'm going through the photos and where people put the stickers and things that appeal to them. And it really surprises me. I know it wasn't a huge sample, but it's not what I would have expected. So in just a good and interesting way. It is informative, that's informative, and I know that it hasn't been socialized broadly yet, so.
Yeah, no, again, it was a good, thorough, diverse discussion, I think, on opportunity and how that gets factored in over the long term. So we were also excited for some of the feedback that we heard and how we can use it and just start programming out from here on other opportunities for input.
I think we have a comment from the public, so go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tony DeRosa, 130 John Street. I did attend the meeting. It was very well run. I forget his name and I apologize, but the new economic developer, very excited, very well presented himself in the town for this. But I have been thinking about it, and one of the reasons why this has popped up again is because my understanding is the RMLD is looking to expand, that they're going to need more room going forward in the future. But then I also recalled that they said they were expanding because they needed room for more trucks, bigger trucks, more storage of transformers, poles, etc. But that could end up with a construction yard creating almost a dead zone in the new Eastern Gateway. Something that I think should be taken into consideration and worked with RMLD on. That is all. Thank you.
Any other thoughts, comments?
What's next?
What's next is that we will start formulating the next engagement piece, whether that's another workshop, open house type, or survey, or combination thereof. I am hesitant to start putting out like conceptual layouts and uses until we have more feedback. So that's the goal, is to try to get as specific feedback as possible. And I think the ideas of like things like sub-districting and things of the nature need to be considered in terms of massing or uses, or like if they are, how the south side of the tracks is almost a separate district and vision versus the north side general way side of the tracks, and what those opportunities look like, whether what we're gaining and looking at on both sides. So because they are almost different both, I think, in terms of where general uses may be going, but also their connection and access points and just overall use of the sites and parcels. So trying to separate the two to get more district feedback, I think, would be helpful, because to blanket it all as one potential retail, commercial, housing, industrial, I don't think is gonna fit. So
Thanks.
yeah. Okay.
All right.
Next one was the MBTA Communities Pattern Book, and I briefly brought it up at the last meeting, but we had the technical difficulties in getting you guys the outline and shareable link. So I think that worked this time. But this is mostly in relation to the zoning that was passed, and I think, again, this originally was conceived of if we were looking at a different district that didn't have design guidelines, and as we started to focus more towards downtown, it became, is this still a need, and if so, how can we evolve the design guidelines to be more hopefully public friendly in terms of less jargony and word language and more visuals for everybody to get behind and understand what this looks like in a potential development sense. So we asked the consultant to start putting together the framework of what that pattern book could look like in translation to the design guidelines. I think they've done a good job in the formatting and kind of how it can be used in a step-by-step way, and would love feedback on that. One, The second piece, and maybe more directly, is the thoughts. Later in the pattern book, they had picked, and we had picked with them, some specific parcels to conceptualize and look at in terms of redevelopment in the future. And I do want to make sure that if that's the path we go, that that's appropriate, because at the onset, I had more of a blanket thought that like we would just draft up a perfect square, call it 6,000 square foot lot, if that's the minimum, maybe a 12, maybe a 20, and call it a perfect square and do like some concepts on it to show. But they had recommended real parcels to show how it can fit within a corridor or the downtown in and of itself in relation to abutting parcels. So if that's the path we want to go, we could go either or. I could see the merits of both. And then the third piece would be hopefully to get a more structured way as we add more detail to the pattern book to get input from you guys, the historical committee, and the public in general to ensure that it is user friendly from all sides.
It's a lot of work.
It is a lot.
Yeah.
40 pages is too much to get anybody to focus on.
Yeah.
We should go for 20 and settle for 25.
Mhm.
And I was
Well-
curious where they picked up the language. Is that partly Latin or what?
Yeah, that's kind of
That's
what they do.
just, yeah.
It's layout. That's all. You see layout here.
Yeah.
I guess, to me, right, this is more of a reference book. I mean, a reference, so like no one's gonna, right,
It's where you look something up.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, like, how are they looking?
You're
at
like
it?
writing
Yeah.
the encyclopedia.
Yeah. I guess,
Well, we don't want to pay for anybody writing an encyclopedia.
I will chime in on the last piece first.
Mhm.
I like the idea of providing an example on a parcel.
Mhm.
I fear that if you pick actual specific parcels, then that gets interpreted as a proposal.
I agree.
And then it carries on the baggage. This whole effort carries on the baggage of like trying to explain like, no, that's just an example. And no one really believing that, right? Using, the bank and, is that the bank and post office building?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
That one is, yeah.
Like really, are you just,
Right.
picking that, or like, do you have,
Mhm.
I guess my suggestion would be to look at the parcel sizes, within the district, look at the various parcel sizes or conditions and configurations and create, not just the square, because
Right.
that doesn't, that
is
hardly
perfect.
exists here, right? There are rectangles here, but it's a very narrow front, and like what's the typical in this situation?
Mhm.
Or these sort of oddball, I don't know what shape you call that, almost triangular
Right.
shapes, and how you might address that. That would be my suggestion.
And make some hypotheticals out of that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's how we settled on 123 Haven and a few of the others of different size of parcels, but then also trying to focus on the different corridors, Haven High and closer
Yeah,
to Main
yeah.
Street, to give a little bit of different development sense that occurs along those corridors.
And I guess I would say, it would be okay to say, this is an example for something along High Street,
Mhm.
but don't pick a parcel and say
specific.
that parcel right
Right.
there. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, then, yep.
Right, because there are a lot of different feels, you know.
Right.
There's so many different
Yeah.
feels.
Mhm.
I had no problem with For example, pages 24 through 27.
Well, I had a comment on those, that some of the pictures, I mean, I think they're all placeholder images, but they should be of either something that you want or something that's already here now, because a lot of them have some different feels.
Mm-hmm.
Like, making sure they're either local examples,
Yes.
There would
that
be-
is- yeah.
something.
Yeah, I think that was something we were trying to figure out too, is find the local examples that are fitting towards these, but then if there are maybe some more modern examples that just
Yeah,
haven't been seen in Reading, how do those
that
get
was
configured
another
in?
comment that I had, is like, you know, maybe not local to Reading, but local to the
Mm-hmm.
region, maybe more, because there is not much modern discussed.
So still New England.
Right, but I mean, there is a lot of modern in New England.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have 21st century New England village,
Mm-hmm.
but mid-century modern is, you know, just one little part, which it is, but
Right.
just making sure that it's included.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed that 24 through 27 were mostly add-ons to existing units as
Mhm.
opposed to
Yeah.
the initial units too.
How does this book dovetail with, I know when we did 40R, there were design guidelines put up, I think by Cpdc for new construction, facades and treatments and cladding and windows. And I'm not sure if they were suggestions or ideas.
Mm-hmm.
But to what degree does this potentially run afoul of that, or at minimum conflict with it? In the mind of the reader, maybe not in the word of law the way it's intended, but maybe in the mind of the reader. Or is that not a problem at all? That there's other standards that exist in the same region?
I would think we need to be very clear that the two are working towards the same thing. I mean, working towards the same guidance.
Right, they
Got
should be
it.
compatible.
Yes.
Like in the images, I'm thinking the words, I have no doubt that will be conveyed. But to the extent you're using an image to convey an idea, and that either conflicts or extends in an undesirable way what's written in, say, what do we call it back then? I forget what the guidance was in the 40R.
I think they are just
Design
guidelines.
guidelines, yeah.
You don't want to extend those, I presume. You don't want to make a statement about extending them out of a.
Correct.
Right.
Yes, yeah.
Right.
How do you do that with a picture, though? It's almost impossible. There's so much effort went into that to say this
Yeah.
big,
Yeah.
this tall,
Yes,
this high.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The words, I have no doubt, will be correct. It's just the images. I wonder how you keep from unnecessarily expanding or confusing the original guidance. I don't have an opinion. I'm just wondering.
Yeah, I think that those really, the way that I view that, those design guidelines, right, there's a lot in there about angles and setbacks and, you know, dimensional controls, and how the architecture might fit in with dimensional controls.
That's a good way to put it.
And
Perfect.
there's some, if I remember correctly, there's some talk about New England style village tiles, but
But we don't show it.
we don't show it, and it's not as detailed as this. Like, what's that mean? What's the New England village style? I think that
Right.
was a term that was used,
Yeah.
or something like that. And as you see here, that's like the 5-6 different architectural styles.
Going on
Yeah.
from there, and John Arena, to your question, I would hope that we would achieve compatibility by a check to make sure that we're
Yeah,
not doing
yeah.
anything that's conflicting. And the application of the existing 40-yard design guidelines, I could think of like more than one time where developers, project proponents would come to us and say, this is New England style, and in my head I'm like, exactly, it's New England style.
I don't know which New
What
England you live in.
what New England do you live in? Where am I? And so I really like the idea of having a depiction, and some of these I don't consider New England, but I understand that they're diagrams,
Right.
they're places, but
That's what
but
I was
I like
thinking.
the idea of having a depiction, and I'm sure there are many, many things one could throw in and say this is New England, but having it vetted through this board and to say, yes, this is what we're talking about, I think that will be very helpful.
Would we go so far as to say that the reference in the zoning guide that you just referred to, the New England style reference, would be amended to point to this?
As you were saying that, it might be. I mean, if we're comfortable with this,
Because they're in the same place.
yeah, if we're comfortable
Yeah.
with this, maybe we end up going back and saying, this, by the way, this is what we meant.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, I think
Because-
that's how we've used it, of pulling those key characteristic terms and giving them visuals where the dimensions are maybe like not the focus in this book.
Right.
So to your point,
Yes.
So
Okay. Good.
I'll run through those again though and give them more of a highlight too, in terms of like cooperation with this book and how we can build that sense a little bit better here, and whether that's amendments in the design guidelines themselves or other. Great. So, very helpful feedback.
Did we get all
Other-
your questions that you were
Think so.
asking us to review?
Yep.
I'm sorry.
I mean, he asked us several things. I'm laughing
Nope,
here.
you
When
got
he's
it,
colonial New England, I remember
Right.
explaining to somebody, my house is the one with a steep roof, and he's like, all the houses have steep roofs. And I'm seeing this right here. Yes, that's New
Steeper.
England.
Steepest.
Nope, I think that captured everything. If and when we can host it, we were thinking in late February, early March timeframe of as this gets built out a bit more of that like joint CPDC RHC meeting and public meeting to again make sure that these are user friendly. The examples that we have are fitting of what we expect on these type of terminologies and things. So we'll keep that rolling.
Sounds like a good time frame.
Sounds fast.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on towards goals and priorities for 2025, and I had just thrown out a quick list, but not an hour or two before the meeting of some things that we had kept on the list. But we do want to make sure that as we prepare some next processes, we're tackling the right issues. And that the time makes sense with you guys, that these are kind of the priority efforts. And actually, as we just went through the last discussion, what I did not include is like any type of review of like the design guidelines, either downtown or Main Street, so that too could be considered in the list. But sorry, I'm just trying to the list I had sent. So in terms of zoning amendments for 2025, of course it's not gonna open. There are two priority efforts that struck me in terms of like we almost need to do them. We can discuss the time frame around them, but thank you. That would be the accessory apartment regulations as well as the floodplain considerations that we had discussed a few years back and now are seemingly coming into effect with the state. So those are two zoning amendments that, at least in terms of 2025, seem to take precedent on our sense in terms of like state requirements and regulations almost driving them more so than locally. There are some, of course, local thoughts that we need to do that too, with accessory apartments, I think being coming out of MBTA communities as a hard need in town to address in floodplain. Maybe as we're looking at the Eastern Gateway, where most of the floodplain area is, how that gets factored in. So we did have other thoughts. I think a few years back, we had looked at the table of uses and is there updates that we need to do to that? I think I would, in that sense, like again, weighting more towards some of the industrial district considerations that come out of Eastern Gateway before we go through that effort. If that was a holistic effort we wanted to undertake, and then other type of residential zoning that we could look, which feels, I don't think now is the time as we look at accessory apartments, and maybe even some other type of visioning with the town in terms of residential landscape and the future opportunities there, so.
I suggest we take a look at the bonding requirements. It's not part of a zoning reg or anything like that, but just, it could be done very fast. It may be an easy check off, but I look at the things that could befall the commission, and that's one of them is if all of a sudden we put a bond and we don't realize and end up having to put forth town money.
I mean, in terms of these subdivision bonds?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not looking for any large detail, but if we have to go to court, who pays the court costs? Who pays the legal fees?
Taxpayers always.
Probably one way or the other.
Yeah, I mean, a bond.
I haven't looked at any of the bonds that are done here or anything like that, but I just like to make sure that the bond we can comfortably live with.
Do you mean in the context of what we discussed earlier about the surety or completion bond?
Yes.
And that would be different for an ADU or an accessory apartment?
No,
because of the scope or-
not necessarily different. I mean, I just don't want the town to be left holding the bag for any undone work,
With something this large a scale, that is this much widespread application.
possibly. I mean, the eastern corridor could have large application.
I guess to me, that's an issue between engineering and town council, to make sure that the mechanisms there are appropriate. Like our purpose in that is to match the what's left with what they said they were going to do, right? And the process of getting to the money, if it's needed, is engineering's job.
I have no problem with that as an outcome, so long as we put
Yeah.
it to council.
Yeah.
To say, give us the worst case scenario. You know, how would you collect on a bond if we had to call on it?
And maybe that's just
What would
like
you recover?
more of an education.
Right, I was gonna say, like,
Education,
if there's
yeah.
some type of like
Here's the-
FAQ or
yeah.
process guide I can try to find with
Yeah.
council of like, here's how this process works, but in terms of establishing the sureties, covenants, those are all through subdivision control law at the state level, and then the agreements with council, and we check with on the covenant agreements and bond agreements with council that those standard forms are acceptable in every instance to date they have been. But ultimately, like if the town does want to pull the bond, that is a town choice, and there are, I'm sure, legal costs associated with that to also get to the end result.
I don't know that going to court is required though, Andrew. I'm pretty sure that once they've defaulted, the surety holder, in order to be able to issue a surety bond, has to live up to their end of the bargain. Unless now you're talking about dealing with surety bonding agents that are flighty. I mean, I guess that would be an extreme situation where both the contractor and then the surety bond agent both defaulted on their.
Yeah.
Right.
You mentioned earlier accessory apartments and the question about ADUs. In the language that will be presented with for accessory dwelling units, is there any customization or adjustment that the town is licensed to make? Because it's Reading and we have parcel sizes or densities or unique conditions, or no, it's cut and paste text from the state. Do we know yet?
So I would like it to be a bit more localized, and there are some allowances to be able to do so.
I see that being a very interactive conversation.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And I'd like to get that way out ahead of that
Yeah.
real quick.
Yeah, there are, I guess my take on that is that, right, there is flexibility in the guidelines that have been, the draft guidelines that are out there right now, for different communities to put rules around, their accessory apartments. We already, I could think we're sort of already ahead of the game, because we do have an accessory apartment zone,
In a standard.
standard, yeah.
Right.
And so I think, right, my assumption is, right, we have a sort of a twofold process that we need to go through. One is understanding what part of that zoning bylaw now needs to be changed, part one, right? Part two is, with those changes, what do we then want to change ourselves, because those assumptions now are going to be different, right? The one that jumps out at me, right? I mean, the biggest one was that I think currently our accessory apartment zone zoning says that the occupant needs to be related to the owner of
Right.
the building, and that's no longer going to be allowed. That may change some people's way of thinking about how the site lays out, right? What other requirements, if the people aren't related, then do you want something else there? Yeah, so I think that we probably should go through that as well.
Are you going in the direction of suggesting that the ADU would, at first pass, mirror the standalone accessory apartment language, because they look and feel the same? Was that where you were going?
I think they are. I mean,
I haven't looked, okay.
our accessory apartment
Yes. but this is-
is not far off. I mean,
Okay.
there's only a couple things. There's like 2 or 3 things that need to change to be compliant.
Which is more expansive, the ADU or the accessory? Which is the superset?
The ADU, right? There's a couple things that need to be changed. The one about the relationship between the two. There's something about parking
Yes.
that probably needs to
The
change.
sticking point is most definitely the special permit that we require.
Yes.
For a lot of accessory apartments, the owner residing either in the principal dwelling or ADU, which is a little different than the family relation.
Yes, yeah.
That we
just
have in
require-
our
Right,
bylaws.
our
Yes.
local is that the owner of the parcel has to reside in one or the other. And how that conflicts, I believe it does conflict with the state
Yes,
allowances
yeah, I
still,
think it
so
does.
that
From what
has
I
to go.
understand, it does, yes.
And then the regulations around parking, most specifically in terms of how we separate and identify now accessory apartments, going back to the half-mile radius from the train depot, do not require parking, but those outside of the half-mile radius, I think, still can require parking like we
yes.
do today.
And that's in
So-
the state law?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
And so it's how we identify which those parcels are. Is that the owners onerous? Do they have to make that claim? Do we have a list of parcels that are in the half mile? How does that kind of flush out? Is it a bird's eye, straight and narrow?
Yeah.
Like, how does that all work out? So those are the thoughts at the state level that I've preliminary identified.
Mhm.
And then, yeah, it's local context of what else would we want to consider while this door is open.
And I think also the utilities, there was something about discussing like if you have 2 versus 1 utility on the site for the ADU
Right.
is another thing that was discussed in terms of that.
Yeah, I'll have to look back at
But
it.
but our language there's a lot of work done on how that accessory apartment can lay out on the site in relation to the existing primary dwelling or as so there's a lot of work that already went in terms of what at the time was the local context of Reading.
And I think it's,
And
a lot of it is still compliant.
And I think a
yeah.
lot of that
Yeah.
is still compliant. Yeah.
Is the thought that the accessory apartment would be superseded by the ADU, subsumed within it? There'd be no reason to have both.
I think
So,
Yeah, I think we just need to, my feeling would be we would modify the accessory apartment language to meet the requirements of the ADU.
You call it an ADU from
They're
there.
pretty
Well,
And just for
we don't need to call it
language-
ADU,
No.
but just say this is how we comply.
I'm sorry to jump in there,
Sure,
but just
no.
for language to keep me straight.
Mhm.
I think of accessory apartments as ADUs, but when people are saying ADU, we're talking about the state law accessory
Right.
apartments, you mean our local bylaw, okay?
Yes.
accessory apartment is the term we use defined, but they
Yes.
are the same and
Yes.
synonymous.
Accessory,
in
yeah,
the
okay.
general
Thank you,
sense.
I'm starting to get
By way of
confused.
example of flexibility, could the town mandate that the accessory dwelling require separate utilities, or no, the state?
So the
So
state,
that's-
it's one of the questions that's happening in the state
I see, it's
now.
being debated now, okay.
Actually, on Friday, there was like a public hearing, it
Mhm.
was about 4 hours, but like all the towns were coming in and making comments on, it's pretty kind of interesting. But, so there was a comment period and it ended on Friday at midnight.
On the draft guidelines.
Yep. And I believe those are still on schedule to release around February.
More to come.
I did not
Yeah.
attend the hearing.
Right, so I think they have to have it by the 2nd, right, cause that's when it goes into effect. So they were, yeah, they were like, it's gonna be a
Squeezing
long
in there.
weekend.
I think it's pretty onerous sometimes to have to, depending on the property type and situation, to have those utilities separated.
Right,
Not always feasible.
right, and that's kind of what that was a big topic of discussion,
Yeah.
so we'll see.
How that fits into zoning versus building code, I think is like the
Exactly.
ultimate
Yeah,
question
yeah.
too, so.
Another topic that has come up in past years that we have continually said we'll do it when we have time is the subdivision.
Yeah.
It's just old.
Mhm.
It hasn't been revised in a long time, and there's some things, just so that you guys are aware, there's some things that it says in zoning, and we immediately say, ignore that, right? Like, don't,
Like
just forget about that,
Yeah, cul-de-sacs with the
Cul-de-sacs,
little,
yeah.
Yes.
the donut.
Yes.
But I think there's some other pieces in there that just are out of date because we haven't gone back and looked at it,
Mhm.
Yeah.
revised it for 20 years plus, yeah. I mean, subdivisions aren't a major driver in town, but they still happen, right? On a regular basis, so, I don't know, just,
Yeah, somewhere on my list that I almost correlated them and I probably shouldn't have, but a few years back, we did the stormwater regulations in terms of general upkeep to comply with the new NIPD's
Mhm,
permit
mhm,
regulations. The way I've looked at those two is like they are helpful to be up to date in terms of some of the science and data being used. But what we don't have in those is a minimum storm capture. And so it's almost right now phrased as to the best degree practical, but we may wish to consider why not have the requirement either in subdivision regulations or the stormwater regs or just in general regs of capturing at least the 5-year storm, maybe 10-year storm. And I kind of correlated that to the subdivision regulations because the municipal vulnerability preparedness program does allow grants for subdivision regs and stormwater regs. And if I could combine the two into one policy update in terms of grant and technical support from an engineering consultant, I could look at that opportunity this spring.
Yeah, and on that one point alone on stormwater, I hadn't quite realized that as bigger storms are getting more regular, it seems like we should be having at least a minimum storm requirement on that, just that one point.
Yeah, and that one's an interesting one because sometimes additions and things are exempt, but like, right, different scales of development, you might look at different storm capture and like whether that's lot size or use intensity, I'm not sure, but like do you treat the single family or even 3-family home or akin to a larger multifamily development on Main Street, and are those standards different? I think on a lot of the special permits and large scale developments, we're looking at capturing a larger storm event just given the impervious increase at them. So those are the thoughts kind of early on as we scroll through those that for the stormwater regs that are important to try to clarify, I think.
Andrew,
Yeah.
you have so much time in the day, and there's, I think you guys have already thrown out there like 3 or 4, what I would consider really important big topics. Obviously, I think at some point we should stop putting some priority on when these should be attack claims, so that we, you know, and obviously let's throw more against the wall here first, but I just see like I'm looking at the 4 that were just kind of gone over. I would accessory apartments and then the stormwater capture stuff being, to me, the two, from my point of view, the 2 most important. And then I would probably hit that floodplain stuff thereafter. We haven't got all the way down the list yet, but
Right.
those, you kind of already flushed them a little bit there. I'm assuming we put them in order that you thought priority was. Yeah. But I think that stormwater recapture on a larger scale is pretty important.
On priorities, I would agree that the accessory apartments is the place to start. I also, Guy, as much as you just had us try to focus, I have to verbalize something I see down here also. I'm not saying it needs to be a priority that outweighs the others, but I think that number 5 for the conceptualize a town vision plan, outline and ask, that came from an instructional motion, right? And so at some point, we should slot in kind of, I'm not saying it has to be the first thing because we have other things to do, but we should slot in what the time frame is for that. Inevitably, somebody will ask about it at town meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see that one almost as a necessity before you even look at anything like residential and commercial zoning, maybe separate from the Eastern Gateway, but like those type of goals and visions are almost necessary just to start the next process and discussion on those other elements, at least how I've seen it.
And it seems like it kind of goes with the table of uses that you're
Right.
number 3. So it's like 3 and 5, where we're combining stormwater and subdivisions. It might be 3 and 5 are combined in a way.
Is there any downside to kicking floodplain overlay? I mean, what I'm hearing is some agreement that accessory dwelling units is a number 1.
I think so.
Maybe a number 2 combining stormwater and subdivision. And floodplain overlay is then getting kicked down the road.
Yeah.
Are there
Is there
repercussions
a-
for kicking that down the road?
Is there you says there's a state
Because there's a
model
state
of-
law.
Yeah, so I actually admittedly don't know the repercussions off the top of my head of not being in compliance with the floodplain
But that
maps
looks
and
like
model.
it has a deadline of July
Right.
2025, so I don't know if we can move that too
That's
far.
when the new maps take effect. I would say if we can at least go back and forth, and I've already started the conversation with the floodplain administration at the state. But I would hope and think that they would think that at least if we tackle it within the calendar year of 2025, it doesn't need to be prior to July, hopefully, but if we could do it within the calendar year, they might find that acceptable.
So are you looking to take that to town meeting in April? That's what I'm reading on.
That was kind of like if we
Yeah.
wanted to meet their July enactment of their maps, that would have to be the time frame, right?
Right.
But if I can go back and forth with them of pushing it off towards the later part of the year, and let them know we're working towards it. But April town meeting, just given
Right.
its scale and the warrant report already, and the conversations we still need to kind of reopen on that, just make more sense for November. It is like you almost could copy paste the state model bylaw, but we went a lot of back and forth in 2022 of like, why are they defining historic structures? Why is this in here? What is that? What's the reasoning for some of these items within the model bylaw that are not further explained within it? And then on top of that was like the idea of like special permits for other uses and development in the floodplain, and that's almost an entirely different discussion beyond the state model bylaw.
And then with the accessory apartments, the state regulations come into effect on February 2nd. So what, we're not voting on it before February 2nd.
Right. So the state guidelines are going to take precedent, and an applicant can come in and use them.
Until we've changed
Until-
ours.
Our zoning is more for consistency and a localized approach, so long as we don't conflict, is the ultimate goal there. But someone could come in with the proposal for a 900 square foot accessory apartment. And if
And
that
it's
met
by
the other
right.
state guidelines, they can do that by right. So there's not necessarily a need to do anything, but reducing the conflicts and having the local
Yeah.
option, I think, is a preferred approach.
Right, where we already went through like how that accessory apartment, if it's attached,
Mhm.
should sit on the site, right?
Mhm.
In relation to the existing home. To sort of, I'm gonna say throw that out or make that null, right?
Mhm.
Sort of would be too bad.
Right.
Do we have time to do that, attack that one, by April town meeting?
So I do think that there's time to bring that to April. I think the ultimate another consideration with that is in most instances to date, we've always tried to hold the public hearing and have the bylaw wrapped up before the warrant deadline so that
Right,
everybody has it within the warrant report and gets the full look at it with weeks in advance to
And-
town meeting. In this
so we may
case-
not have time.
Yeah, in
Right,
this
that's what I'm
case, you
thinking.
would be more likely hosting your public hearing beyond that date, which is allowed and you can do that. And then the bylaw would just be presented on the floor of town meeting. And there are mechanisms to do that, I believe.
I think it makes sense to I'm gonna say start down that path. And at least understanding what I'm going to use this term, and I don't mean it to be very negative, but just a little bit negative, the exposure that we have with relying on the state guidance versus what we have. And I think we need to go in, we need to at least have that understanding and know whether this is a rush or whether that's a risk that the town is okay with.
Right.
And a bigger discussion that we want to have and stretch out, knowing that we have some, I hate to use a term, but some risk, right?
Right, we do.
So,
People may not be happy with what can happen in the meantime.
Yeah,
We should start that conversation.
yeah,
I think.
and if the decision is we'd rather have a bigger discussion and have and take that, then great. But if it's maybe we just go and.
I assume that we're looking at new maps on floodplain, correct?
I
Have
believe.
have you made a comparison of where it changes from the old map?
So we have a list of parcels, I believe, that are now considered within floodplain, based on the changes, yep.
It's it's not huge.
It's not.
It's not huge.
not.
It's not
Okay.
like an enormous section of town. It's,
Right.
right, it's mostly over by the,
Mostly over by DPW Frayne area
Yeah.
on New Crossing Road in the industrial district, and where they are floodplain zones in residential areas, they almost very equally overlap with wetlands. So those are protected areas as well.
Well, are you dealing with floodplain state definition or floodplain FEMA?
Floodplain state definition.
Okay, so it doesn't require flood insurance,
Right.
even if a bank might require flood insurance? I've seen issues where people never knew that FEMA was drawing a line, and they drew the line and
you know,
rubbed
that was a
arms.
big,
Yeah.
that was a big issue,
Right.
Yeah.
10 years ago or so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't have the answer to that
Continues.
question off the top.
So I want to know both, where the state line is and where FEMA's line is.
Yeah, I think. I mean, you don't, you want to give a person an opportunity to say, no, this should not be in the floodplain.
We really are talking about that industrial district down by,
Yeah.
this one industrial district.
Okay.
That
And
is
not-
our floodplain, right?
That's,
Yeah.
because the rest are floodplains, are wetlands
Wetlands, yeah.
that are also floodplains. So, right, no one's building in them. There's no issue. There's no, right, no one's gonna recommend or even be allowed to do anything anyways, so.
Have a quick go back on the EDUs. Can you describe a half-mile circumference with some reference point datum in the center of the depot? How does the EDU language deal with parcels that would be split when you draw just that circumference?
Right, so that's what I mean by trying to further contextualize that, and can we have local regulations on how that's
That
applied
falls on
or
us
like
to say.
defined? Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. Okay, so I think short-term wise, we'll start whipping up a draft ADU amendment. I think we'll separately highlight necessary for consistency with the state, and then flags and highlights of locally conversations and what we can open up for that. And hopefully we can have that by your February meeting. I would definitely want to get eyes on the state guidelines when they're released, and that'll be a short turnaround, but we'll do that. We'll start preparing maybe some rough schedule of if we wanted to get to April with it, what would that look like? I think we'll look to, we have some, I don't want to call this like by any means, no grant is a guarantee, but if we can look in the spring, and maybe we can look for expressions of interest now, but if we can write to MVP for some sort of grant for subdivision and stormwater, then that wouldn't necessarily kick off until the fall if there was a grant award, and then you're looking at a good year-long process to bring those up to speed. If we didn't get the grant, then we can talk about doing it locally and just administering it at the local level, which is fine too. But if we can get a grant and some technical support, why not?
Agree.
Yeah.
And I will go back and forth with TCR and at the state level on the floodplain, and maybe some elements of schedule there, and if we can work with them more closely towards the November, and that would give us the summer to at least like work through that process post April town meeting.
And for the town vision plan, is that something that you would ask at town meeting for funds to help with that as well?
Yeah, I guess I should also think we would start to frame a type of scope of work and potential ask towards, I would probably at the onset, at the top, might consider more of like an RFI or RFP process to get some numbers and interest from firms that maybe do this work, but drafting a scope with you guys, bringing it with town management and the select board and seeing if this is a need that we want to put out there and what that number looks like for that type of work, and then ultimately if there is room in the budget to make that ask. So it can be a bit of a lengthy process to finish that, but if that shapes up towards the November town meeting, then I don't think I'd have that answer by April.
Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah,
think
I
that's
think-
fine,
I think that would be fine,
but
yeah.
just keeping it in mind to show that we're all thinking about it
Mhm,
and bringing it back up, you know, as, because it was an instructional motion.
mhm.
That we have a plan.
Yeah, that it, you know, we're listening.
Mhm.
It sounds like a very robust agenda.
This is ambitious, this is a lot.
It is ambitious.
And hey, as long as our agendas are otherwise just continuances, we can get a lot done.
Yeah. Okay.
Is that I mean, do we have to have any more?
I don't think so. Obviously, we'll march on with the Eastern Gateway.
Yep.
I will, at some point, probably put some thought and highlights toward design guidelines. I don't think it's an immediate need. Definitely with the pattern book and the downtown design guidelines, but as Main Street continues to be developed and those design guidelines predate the zoning we wrote that are seeing the development, like is there any highlights and need in that document, which can be administered. Those are local Cpdc regs. There's no town meeting process, so if it happens to be able to be fit in, we can look at them. Yeah.
Okay.
Plus everything else.
Andrew, how in depth are you looking to get into this residential zoning discussion? You mentioned it.
Don't think we need to get too in-depth to it until we get through accessory apartments and potentially even some type of vision plan, but I kept it on the list mostly in that, like, there was resident feedback that our minimum lot size is working, our dimensional controls working during the MBTA communities process, and now being outside of MBTA communities, if that's locally kept to single family or two family, what does that discussion and process look like? That would be a very large town discussion, I think almost akin to the MBTA communities process. And just going through the list we just established, it's certainly not going to fit into this year.
Definitely a next year thing.
Yeah.
If it's- yeah.
I think that's okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
so too,
yeah.
So.
Where we open a brewery.
It's the distillery down at Walkersburg. Not the same, but
Yeah.
close, getting close.
Similar idea, right?
Yeah.
Station one would be great.
And maybe just to clarify, like a lot of that can fit into existing definitions and uses, but it's a little subjective, and so that's
Yeah.
really just for clarification's sake in most part.
Yeah, yeah. All right, are we down to, meeting minutes and reorganization? So, or do we have anything else?
Yep, nope.
Andrew, do you have clear directive on how you're gonna prioritize these?
I do.
All right. Shall we take the meeting minutes from December 9th, 1st.
I sent Olivia a note that on page 3, the second to last paragraph, it says, I guess it's in the first sentence, it says the Eastern Gateway District, which is a strong portion of the existing industrial zone. I didn't know if strong was the word you wanted to use.
Yeah, I changed that to significant, just because I think it's better reflection.
more
I think
sense.
I did verbatim. It wasn't the best description, but.
Tony? So significant portion.
Yeah.
Perfect. That was my only comment.
Anyone else? Comments? No.
I was absent.
It was too.
Oh yeah, you guys barely had a
You had hardly
there.
anyone.
All right. Do we want to motion to,
I'll move to approve the minutes from the meeting on December 9th, 2024.
As amended.
roll, we need to do a roll call
Roll
on
call,
this,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, sure.
We'll have a roll call vote, start with Guy,
Yes.
Hillary,
Yes.
John, yes, Heather,
Yes.
John.
Yes.
Are we best to do reorganization, save the executive summary, executive meeting to the last, or does it matter?
I can be fairly brief on that one. So the direct abutter to the project at Maine and Washington has just requested the executive session minutes to be released from that process when the applicant had appealed the decision issued by Cpdc. I'm trying to work through some clarifications on if that needs to be an executive session through the board to be released, or if that can be done through chair and vice chair. Ultimately, if it is an executive session and at deliberation of the board as a whole, we would schedule that for Friday, or sorry, not Friday, February. Just for the conversation to go through the minutes. I think we had sent them, just given that there's 7 sets of minutes that would need to be reviewed. I'm sure there's some amendments needed and points of order in them just to, as every set of minutes does, especially mine. But that's just been the request, and
Okay.
we're happy for whatever the board decides. So just didn't want to surprise anyone if in February you saw an executive session and you said, what is this for? Like, I thought we
So
were
we
done
don't have
with
to act on this
it.
tonight.
No.
Okay.
I do have a question about timeliness though. I mean, the nature of executive sessions is to keep stuff out of the public eye that's not appropriate. And there's a list of those sorts of conditions. But when those conditions have passed, it's for the public interest, it's best to have the minutes released in somewhat of a prompt fashion after the subject matter is overcome by events or the decision is in the rearview mirror. Some of these meetings are close to a year old or more, and I'm wondering if it frustrates, is there a proactive way we can decide about executive minute? It probably doesn't happen that often, but when it does, release them in a appropriately timed way rather than say a year later.
Well, the reason why they were a year old is because there was a lawsuit against this board and members of this board
When was that
that
resolved or
was
settled or
that
otherwise?
was ongoing for a year
A while.
plus.
When was
So,
that disposition?
probably over the summer.
Yeah.
I feel like it was like 6 months ago, but maybe
Yeah.
more. Yeah.
Yeah, so that.
So we probably,
Yeah.
this should have been addressed.
I mean,
yeah,
otherwise
when
you have
I-
no trigger to tell you to do it unless somebody writes
Right,
a letter.
Exactly, yeah, yes. But it was appropriate
Yeah,
for
that's
a
fine.
very long time to hold those because it did go on for.
The other thing I don't know, but I'm sure town council was, do you need an executive session meeting to release executive minutes? I don't think so. I think they can be, once the subject matter is passed, but we ought to just follow the same
Yeah,
process as
yeah,
select board.
yeah.
So trying to tidy up that process and what that actually is, and do we need executive session? Do we need a board discussion? Yada yada.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we'll summarize that in the next week or two.
Okay.
I don't disagree with anything said.
But I do agree, like, we probably should have done this,
Right.
6 months ago. Once that issue was,
There's no
Resolved.
mechanism to
Was
remind you, so I fully appreciate
Yeah.
this slips your mind. 'cause
Yeah.
Other
Yeah.
stuff takes
yes,
precedent.
yeah. All right, last item.
Yep.
So, right, just to go over sort of where we are, right, we typically reorganize in July, right? We didn't because we're in the middle of MBTA communities. It made sense to sort of keep things the way they were. I'm personally not interested in staying as chair longer than, the year. I've done that actually more than
It
once
was
in
more
my
than a
times.
year.
Yeah, over COVID,
For a long
I did
time.
it for at least 2 years, just because, again, it was hard to change. So I don't want to do that again. So it's not fair. So, right, we talked about reorganizing after the first of the year.
You
So
did.
here we are. So, I'll just put it out there, I'll nominate Heather, to be chair.
And I think when we last attempted to reorganize and we wrangled you into being chair for a little bit longer, I said, geez, I'd really like you to be chair for MBTA committees. And so you did, and I think I will have the time more this spring to be able to do that than I did this fall
Alright.
and winter.
So that's a strange way of saying yes.
It's a long way of saying no.
Any other nominations, either for chair or secretary, right? Those are the two positions that we have.
Oh, for secretary too.
Yeah.
I would nominate Hillary if she would do secretary. And only because she's been on CPDC a little bit longer.
Well, I'll try it.
There you go.
Do we need to second both of those?
If you do,
Yeah, all right.
I'll second the one for Heather.
And I'll second the one for Hillary. Any other nominations? All right. How do we do this for, it's awkward, right?
We'll just do Heather and then
Yeah, we'll do two different
But
votes.
is it a motion?
It's a
Motion to
Appoint.
appoint,
Yeah,
yes, thank you,
that's-
that's the right word. Appoint Heather,
teamwork.
appoint Heather as chair for CPDC. I guess the question, and before I finish off that nomination, is that, I think we want to get back on the July cycle, and so,
So we should revisit it in July.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just putting it out there. I think we ought to revisit it in July, whether, what happens at that point. Just let that lie. But I think this is probably 6 months. And
We'll note it through June 2025.
but I think the rules are like anyone can call for a reorganization at any
Right.
time if they want. So, so yeah, there's a motion
Second that.
All right. So roll call vote, Guy,
Yes.
Hillary,
Yes.
John, yes, Heather,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
all right. And motion to, what did we use? Appoint Hillary as secretary for CPDC.
Second.
All right. Another roll call vote, Guy,
Yes.
Hillary,
Yes.
John, yes, Heather,
Yes.
John.
Yes.
All right.
Well, folks.
All right.
Congratulations.
Motion to adjourn?
Okay, well,
All
there
right.
you
All
go.
those in favor?
Aye.
Yeah.
Alrighty, thanks, Guy.
Thank you.